Oh,
What's
you
up? Are
going?
you good? Are you
Yeah,
good?
yeah, I'm here. I'm ready to go.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So, first off, I wanted to say thank you for accepting the debate.
Oh
I
yeah.
clicked on your Facebook profile. I like your little froggy meme guy. I didn't think such people actually existed or were actually interested
Well,
in Discord. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you taking this debate.
most definitely. I'm very excited to talk about this, and as far as the whole let's take the statues down. I definitely have a very strong opinion about that. So ready to go whenever you are.
Yeah, I gathered that. So actually, I'm going to open this up a little bit differently than I usually open up debates with. I'm actually going to be talking about what I'm not going to be arguing for. So I am not advocating for deplatforming of reasonable conservative opinion. I am not advocating for um, mobs coming together and tearing down statues upon their own volition with no rule of law. Um, what I am arguing for is the removal of statues of Confederate generals in the United States. So actually, I'm going to open up with the story of Klaus von Stauffenberg, the German officer who attempted to assassinate Hitler, failed and was subsequently executed. And actually, what happened to Klaus von Stauffenberg after World War II? So the German army is decimated. The Allies occupy half of Germany. The Soviet Union occupies half of Germany. The Allies, they realize, hey, we need to stand up a German military, but we don't really want a bunch of Nazis in it, right? How do we figure out who is a decent guy and who was a Nazi? And they actually went through and they would interview their low to medium level officers in the German army, and they asked them, hey, what did you think about Klaus von Stauffenberg? Did you support what he did? And if a German service member was like, yeah, Stauffenberg, I supported that guy. He acted honorably. He did what he had to do. They kept him in the German army. Fast forward 50 or so years, there are statues of Klaus von Stauffenberg in Germany. There are no statues of Erwin Rommel. Now, the average Confederate soldier probably did not care much about the politics of what led up to the Civil War. And there was amazing military geniuses that fought on the Confederacy. That's undeniable. The reason that these statues should be removed is because these people committed treason against the United States. It's not because just because they held slaves, right? Lots of famous Americans, Jefferson, Washington, held slaves. I don't advocate for the removal of their statues. However, they did not commit treason against the United States of America.
Right, but they did commit treason at one point in time in 1776 when Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, and
Sure.
and that was the
And if
initial.
you let me finish my statement, I would actually address that. So I'm giving my opening statement. If you don't mind, if you don't mind,
I'm just ready.
All right. And I'll shelf that for after your rebuttal. But the people of the Confederate States of America, the CSA, they committed treason against the United States. It makes no sense for state and local municipalities to be celebrating people that betrayed their country and shed the blood of their countrymen. And that's really my only contention. I'll pass it to you, and we'll see where it goes.
So back to the Civil War, just the idea of the Civil War. First of all, more American lives were lost during the Civil War. Almost 700,000 American lives between the North and the South. 500,000 of those lives were Confederate soldiers. Okay, in today's population, if it was proportioned out to today's population, that would equate to 6 million Americans losing their lives during time of war. Now, a lot of people don't understand where the Civil War's roots what the Civil War's roots are, and everybody, and we're all taught in school to believe that, hey, this was a war about slavery. It was there was slavery in the Civil War, and that was an issue, but people fail to recognize that Abraham Lincoln, first of all, was a racist. Okay, there was nothing that was loving towards. He was for African Americans being able to have the same jobs, but according to Lincoln, they would never live up to the white man standards. I mean, there's a lot of history that goes with the Civil War and some of these monuments, and I'm gonna go ahead and touch base on just a few of these monuments, and a little bit of the history, where it's at, and we're having a discussion about the history of the United States. And what it seems to me to be like is we're really talking about washing away the history of the United States for our children, for our grandchildren, for our children's children's children. And we don't understand that it only takes a few generations to forget about our history. And when you are trying to, when you're trying to say that, oh, we're gonna to think that it's okay to take the history from the United States and wipe it away. It's indifferent what happens to the Confederate statues, but then there's an emotional charge when we see ISIS overseas doing the same thing to historical sites in the Middle East. Am I wrong? Am I right? Can I get an amen? Hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus. That is the issue we're talking about. We're talking about indifference of opinions and safe spaces. And I think that it's time that we just observe our history. We look at that history, we analyze it, and we don't repeat the same mistakes that our ancestors made, but we also learn from what our ancestors came about as well. And with that is my opening statement. We cannot forget our history here in the United States.
Okay, so you threw a lot at me there. I'm going to do my best to unpack that all. So I'll be starting kind of where you start off and work backwards. So we talked about how 700,000 Americans died, and I understand that that's the generally accepted view of historians. It is of my opinion that the Confederates weren't Americans. They were Confederates. They declared themselves to be a different state, a different nation. And in doing that, they were not Americans. They were Confederates. They desired to break away. The North and many loyalist Northern supporters in the South didn't think that was such a great idea. We fought a war over it. I've always had a problem when we're lumping together Confederates and Americans, U.S. citizens, and saying that they're the same thing. They're not. When you take up arms against your own brother, your own countrymen, to me, you no longer are part of that tree. Now, if you surrender, you lay down your arms, that's a different conversation. I'm all for welcoming them back. Now you get into are we whitewashing history? What are our kids gonna see when they're rolling down the street? Well, I have kids, and I will tell you this: I want my children to have a certain respect, a certain warranted respect for the military. I don't want them to have respect for people that were fighting for an unjust cause. Now, you talked about briefly in the opening statement about how Jefferson committed treason. Well, the difference between treason and a revolutionary is just cause. It's jus ad bellum. In the case of the War of Independence, the nation of Great Britain was infringing upon the United States, the colonies, natural rights to self-determination. In the Civil War, there was no such egregious infringements of natural rights. They lost an election. They had a say in that election, and they chose to secede. They still had the ability to govern themselves. And they chose to secede in order to preserve the institution of slavery. No other reason is mentioned more often in the individual states' Declaration of Secession than slavery. Now, was the North fighting to end slavery? That's irrelevant to this conversation. Probably they weren't. Their motivation was to preserve the Union. When two sides are squaring off in a war, they need not be diametrically opposed motivations. The South was fighting to preserve slavery. And it is for that reason that I call them traitors as opposed to revolutionaries. Now, your final point was: Are we washing away our own history? Are we whitewashing it? Are we making it a safe space? No, I absolutely think that children and adults and anybody that's hungry for knowledge should learn about the Civil War and should learn about the sacrifices that happened on both sides. And it should be taught in public schools. Kids should know about it. What statues represent is who we glorify as a society, who our role models are. And as I mentioned, I have children. I don't want my children's role models to be people that thought it would be okay to betray their nation in order to preserve the institution of slavery.
Okay. Well, first of all, in history, in today's society, we learn that the main reason why the Civil War occurred was because of slavery. That is incorrect. Okay. It was a matter of federal power up against state power and statehood. And the Confederacy was a group of states that wanted to come together because they felt that the North was trying to impose too much of a federal. First of all, the North had the central bank. Okay, so the North was for protectionism and central banking and big government subsidies. All right, and the South, the North used the issue of slavery to precipitate the war. Okay, that was an issue, but that got drawn out into this. Even in the North, there were slaves at the time. It wasn't really relevant until later on in history. And when you talk about individual choices and liberty and freedom, the South had every right to do that. It's how our country was formed in the first place with the Declaration of Independence. You had the Jeffersonians, and then you had Hamilton, and Hamilton was for the federal bank. Okay, and then when Jefferson came around, Jefferson got rid of the federal bank, and then the federal bank came back, and then Andrew Jackson got rid of the federal bank. And like I said, this issue is about connecting our heritage and our history to our ancestors, learning from their mistakes, also at the same time, taking into consideration that, hey, there were a lot of good things that came out of this. You got the modern, the reason why the South, decided to secede was they wanted to be left alone. And it seems a lot like what we have going on today. We have a big federal government that has come in, literally is watching this conversation right now. Okay. And when we turn this QallOut Debate off, they're still watching. Okay. They can still record everything, and they're still in our ear. They've got, I just saw somebody on social media, Justin Moldo, he posted a few minutes ago, hey, I just ate some Totino's pizza, and next thing you know, I'm seeing Totino's ads on Facebook. Well, yeah, Big Brother's watching you. And that is why the South seceded. The South said, hey, Big Brother, you're not that big. We have our own liberty, we have our own freedom, and, we're going to live by that. Like I said, 500,000 Confederate soldiers died during the Civil War. The Civil War wasn't about slavery. It was about the North pushing the South around, okay? And it was about the South not wanting to be told what to do. And it was about the South wanting to secede for those reasons. Like I said, Lincoln was a racist. He wasn't for interracial marriage. He was highly against it. History proves that when looking back, especially a lot of his quotes. He thought that he should have, like I said, he thought that that blacks should have the same, or Negroes should have the same, rights, but good luck ever succeeding and being as, being as beneficial as being a white person. Like I said, he was against interrace marriage, and there's a story that I want to tell that I remember reading as a kid. There was a train wreck in New York, and two Confederate POWs lived through this train wreck. All right. And after the train wreck, the North had brought them back to a hospital for care. They had received medical attention. They did live for a couple hours, but the North they lived for 48 hours after the train wreck. So they were alive for 2 days or so, and they were in a town called Berryville, New York, and there's a church up there in that town. And in the backyard,
I actually know that town. I'm from the area.
There is a backyard in that church, and in that backyard there are those two Confederate soldiers. So what you're advocating for is going into that backyard at that church, okay, tearing out that monument, disturbing that grave, which is next to other American lives. Okay, why did the North bury those two POWs next to other Americans that fought against Indians? You have other Northern Civil War soldiers in that grave, and there's two Confederate POWs there. They were the North's enemies at war at the time, and essentially they were the Nazis, what we have right now going on. And not only did we try to keep them alive, but we gave them proper burial. And every year on Memorial Day, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are still veterans that go on Memorial Day and put Confederate flags on that memorial, along with every other gravesite back there. And the Confederate flags, that to me, that's America. That is America. And when you talk about history in World War II, and you're talking about 1940s Nazi Germany and Americans rolling in tanks and liberating Auschwitz, and the Southern boys that went to war for this country were flying Confederate flags while liberating Nazi Germany in Auschwitz. How the hell have we gone from that point in history to talking about taking down statues and monuments and disturbing graves? It blows my mind. This is America. Yeah, I grew up with a rebel flag hanging in my family's house in Tennessee. That's to me, that's culture. That's America. I think of the South. I think of when I was vacationing as a child in Tennessee, going out there and enjoying something that I don't get to see that often here in Arizona. I'll pass it back to you.
When the men of the Wisconsin Iron Brigade were liberating slaves that were being held in the South, they were flying the Stars and Stripes, the flag of America. I want to make that pretty abundantly clear. So you actually said some things that I agree with. It was a the Civil War was about federal power versus states' power. And I agree with you. It was about the power of the federal government to restrict the slave trade and the use of slaves versus the Confederates' desire to keep that unfettered. And I understand there's this like movement to try to like this revisionist history movement going on. I haven't heard it tied to the central banks before. That one was new to me. So kudos for you on that. If we look at the plain language of the words of the people that seceded from the Union, from the United States to try and make their own country, there is no reason that is cited by every single state except for slavery. That's it. It's mentioned more than any other reason. To my knowledge, the central bank's not mentioned at all, but I could be wrong. I'm referring to their specific declarations of independence for the individual states. And again, what separates a revolutionary versus a traitorous, treasonous person is just cause. The South had no just cause. And if they did have a just cause, they certainly weren't invoking it when they were actually spelling out their reasons for going to war with the United States. And I understand that it's part of Southern culture. And I understand that maybe, you know, the Northern Virginia battle flag, the stars and bars, maybe it takes on a different meaning for somebody that was born and raised in the South, other than, hey, we support this nation whose explicit reason for existence was to maintain the institution of Africanized slavery. I understand that. And I guess maybe on some level I might be sympathetic towards it. However, when we're looking at who we quite literally place upon a pedestal, it should not be these traitorous people fighting to keep others enslaved. And I also want to clarify, I'm not for the removal of Confederate graves, right? That to me, that's something a little bit different. The reason that we gave those soldiers a proper burial, because that's in line with the commonly accepted rules and decorum of warfare, jus in bello. And I would like to think that we would do that for any nation that we would fight a war with. That to me, as a former soldier, is how soldiers ought to conduct themselves. You know, I suppose I'd want a proper.
Do we have any great? Do we have any graves or sites? Well, I'm not sure about this. Do you know of any memorial sites for any of the British during the Revolutionary War? Because with the size of our military, you would think otherwise, but you know, I think that was the war. What was it? The War of 1812 was the last one that was fought on. Last war other than the Civil War fought on American soil.
really have no idea. I'm just wagering a guess. If they did give them a proper burial, they probably didn't have the means in that time period to necessarily mark the grave. But I think that's kind of tangent to the issue.
No, it's actually very relevant, and people these days, you know, especially with you think of the size of the military and how much we're actually overseas instead of defending our land here. But I mean, that's a whole other subject.
And what I'm saying is, in the War of 1812, in 1778, 1776, during the Declaration, the War for American Independence, they probably weren't able to give proper markers to British KIA. And if they were reasonably able to, I would like to think that they would. And again, I want to make the distinction between grave markers and statues of generals and Confederate statesmen in Main Street, USA. That those to me are two different things. But I hit on everything that I wrote down, so I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, well, going back to, can you hear me? Okay, going back to the Civil War and the memorials, another reason why I feel like we're at a point in time where we have people who are they're too worried about their safe spaces. They don't understand that we're washing away history. They seem to neglect the idea that a lot of people still fly the Confederate flag. It has nothing to do with racism. It has everything to do with heritage and culture and history and what goes on. Back in the South. If I don't know if you've ever been to Tennessee,
I live in
Kentucky,
Nashville, bro.
Alabama, Mississippi. Oh, okay. I used to live in Nashville. I used to actually bartend, the first bartending job.
Great
That's
city,
another
man. I love it.
conversation. Yeah, I used to
Okay.
Second Avenue.
Yeah.
But how long you live there?
Since 2011. I actually live in Clarksville.
Okay.
I was stationed at Fort Campbell, so I'm like,
that's where my family's. Man, we got Civil War stuff down.
oh,
my family down.
I'm
in
tracking,
Southside
dude.
Tennessee.
I see it. I'm tracking. I see it all over the place.
Yeah, it's. I mean, so when all this is we've as a country, as individuals, we have taken issues that are no longer of. It's like we're finding new things to get upset about. This group, Black Lives Matter, comes in, and it's not even, in my opinion, Black Lives Matter is a very, very racist group. Racist against white people. They think that they're indifferent to, when I think of Black Lives Matter, I think of terrorists. I think of people destroying cities, public property. You would never see. I would consider myself an anarchist, okay, an anarcho-capitalist. But you would never see me destroying private property in during a riot or during an episode of what was going on. If anything, you would see me there protecting private property and telling these monkeys with bats to quit fucking destroying things and quit hurting people. You see Trump coming out here talking about, he did call out white supremacists and Nazis, okay? And he didn't even call out Antifa by name. Technically, he kind of jarred around it, but he didn't say Antifa, didn't even label them communists. We literally have a divide in this country right now, between fascism and communism. And there is this super, super tug of war between, which one sucks.
I'm real sorry, bud. My kid's in the bath. I got to check on him real fast. I apologize. Give me 2 minutes.
No, you're fine. You're fine. But my opinion, I'm just going to go ahead and keep this going right now. My opinion for what's going on here in the United States is it's a moral dilemma between, do we leave the history of our country alone, or do we sit here and dehumanize and almost try to forget, what I feel like we're trying to dehumanize, our country's history. We're trying to dehumanize our family's heritage, or at least my family's heritage on my mother's side. And I don't feel it's right. I am highly against taking down any statue. I feel like people need to get over their safe spaces. We need to identify the real problems that's going on. And the real problems, what's going on, is a lot to do with what actually caused the Civil War. Central banking, we have too much federal power, and we don't have choices for the individual anymore. And that is why the South rose up, and that is why the South will rise again, they say. But, that's not a threat or anything. That's just that where you get a lot of the don't tread on me and the Americans who, stand up at Bundy Ranch. That's why I always say what Harry Reid called me, a domestic terrorist. We have a problem, and the problem is the federal government. The Civil War at the time, the problem was the federal government. And I think when these two sides of people come together, okay, these two extreme groups, if they ever do, it would be the biggest problem the federal government ever had. Can you imagine these two groups that are fighting each other this past weekend? Could you imagine if they united on a liberty front, if they just actually said, you know what, we're going to actually restore this country, and we're going to get away from central banking. We're going to get away from federal power. We're going to get away from the mess that's going on. I mean, a lot of what's happening is race-baited, race-based, and it has no moral relevancy. People, I guess you could say, are racist, but I know people that were at the Unite the Right march, okay, at the speech, they were there to give speeches, and I know one particular individual who's running for United States Senate who has a Puerto Rican wife, okay, and white and Puerto Rican kids. He's not a racist. I'm going to pass it back to you with that, and I'm going to go get a beverage really quick. Be right back. Actually, I don't want to go get a
Toby, go get the man a PBR. All right.
His name is yeah, he called it. Go get the man a PBR. Yeah.
So
he's been opened my Facebook.
That was just a guess.
He drinks no, I drink IPA, and he drinks
I got a goose on
PBR.
Right here.
Okay, good. That's all right. New York beer.
So you brought up this point again about washing away history, and again, that's not what I'm advocating for. Again, I believe that people who are hungry for knowledge should learn about the Civil War. What this issue specifically is about is who we as a society quite literally place upon a pedestal. Is it people who have betrayed the country for, in my opinion, a not great reason? Or is it somebody else that is more deserving? Mary Curry. I don't know.
You know, I mean, I understand where you come from in that, but then I mean, there's dark parts and dark portions of our country's history. You know, we don't completely dehumanize and villainize Franklin Delano Roosevelt because, you know, of the Japanese internment camps in World War II now, do we? I mean, that was
it depends on who you're talking to.
I mean,
I, at least for me, I'm well aware of what FDR did.
Right.
And I think even on the more academic left, because there's a spectrum on the left, right? And there's many different types of leftists.
Right. There's like JFK. There's the classical liberal that where we've gotten in society today. We have perverted definitions. We no longer have the liberals versus the federalists. We have two wings of the same two wings on the same bird, and I'm ashamed, kind of, you know, in a sense, where we are as a country and where we are as individuals that collectively come together. But I think it'd be an atrocity to see my family's heritage and, you know, our history, where you live. You live less than 30 minutes away from where I used to spend my summers in Southside Tennessee, right where the Cumberland River, literally the Cumberland River, backs up to our family property. And I would be very sad to hear of anything to do with the Civil War, anything, you know, some of the things going away from my family's property. I don't know if you've ever heard of
Keep talking. I'm actually listening. So
have you ever heard of historic Collinsville? That my family owns that.
I'm in debate right now. Hey, I can't talk to you for the next 10 minutes. Solve your own problems, please. You're a big boy. Hey, I want to apologize once again to you and to the audience. That's super bad form.
Hey, no, that's what. Hey, listen, the advice you just gave your child, that's the advice I would like to give to America right here. Okay?
No.
Solve your own problems and quit trying to get rid of my family's heritage.
Well,
please. Can we leave my family's history alone? And so, can we just all solve our own problems and quit having subjective issues be a talking point on the 5 o'clock news? I'd rather be talking about something more relevant.
So,
but
what we're talking about, these statues, these are statues that are paid for by taxpayer funds. All right. If someone wants to have on their own private property a statue of a Confederate general, whatever, these statues that are in dispute, that people are going and protesting against, they are statues that have been erected through municipal, through state funds. And for that reason, I think it is a public issue. It becomes a public issue. And it becomes an issue of who do we glorify as a people? Who, and I keep going back to this, but I feel like it's pretty apt. Who do we put upon a pedestal? People that have fought for the institution of slavery. Because if we look at the plain language of what they're trying to do, if we look at the primary source, it's pretty abundantly clear to me that it was primarily to preserve the institution of slavery, or to preserve the state's rights to have slavery, that shed the blood of their countrymen to preserve that institution, versus something else, versus some other person that did something great in the South. There's so many things, there's so much culture in the South that people don't realize. Now, the Civil War was 4 years, and there's all sorts of statues of these generals. Why not a statue of George Washington Carver? Why not a statue of the Tuskegee Airmen? Why not a statue of Eli Whitney? Right, of really great minds that the South has produced, that have done really wonderful things. Now, you talked about how we should be ashamed as a people, and I adamantly disagree with you. The government, as it stands, for all its foibles and for all its warts, has produced probably the highest quality of life for any human being ever. We could compare us to like Japan, or compare it to like Denmark, and we could have a discussion who is really better, but it's going to be close, right? We have it really good in the United States. Not only that, we have it really good as a species. Less people are dying in war. Less people are dying of preventable diseases. Less people are starving to death. We are making progress. Wonderful, great progress. Hold on. As a species, thanks to our technology, thanks to our innovation, thanks to our government institutions that allow all of that to happen. You talked about how in an anarchist world, you would not go out and destroy private property. In an anarchist world, I don't see how private property could exist. But maybe we can have another debate on that. But
property rights, bro.
Property rights.
Property rights.
Okay.
And that's when the Second Amendment comes in. I mean, you got the right the right to protect your property, and your livelihood. We're talking here about washing away our history, forgetting where we came from, understanding where we came from, not just putting a subjective issue like slavery. We don't have. You had slavery in this country with Native Americans, enslaving each other. You had Africans in Africa enslaving each other before the United States even existed. The Jews, the Jews and Muslims, they all enslaved each other before any of this. And we're so quick to get upset when we see ISIS going through the Middle East and destroying historical sites in Syria. We are so quick to get upset over those kinds of issues when there was slavery back then, but we're going to go ahead and bring this home and be very upset about our country's, about a dark patch in our country's history. I think it's BS. I think it's just another talking point to stir the pot, to keep the left versus the right going, to have an internal struggle. Meanwhile, the federal government is still coming in, and we are at a point in time where we need to come together as individuals and not look at a statue like it's going to be the end of the world if it still exists. You don't like the statue? don't look at it. Don't visit it. Don't go pay your respects to it. I heard something today on Fox News. Yes, I still watch mainstream media sometimes, but this lady was on Fox News, and she came in and she said, "Hey, why don't we?" I wish I would have wrote down her name. Why don't we take a statue of Martin Luther King with one of his quotes and put it up next to, the statue of Robert E. Lee, or a Malcolm X statue, or whatever statue, a Miranda statue here in Arizona, put it next to a Confederate memorial. There's so many solutions to this besides taking away our country's history out of sight, out of mind, right? I think it's wrong. I think it's, not a bad idea to look back and reflect on where we came from, our history. And like I said, the best way to not repeat the mistakes of the past, or to understand the mistakes of the past, and understanding the mistakes of the past, is a big reason why I feel like there's so much divide right now, because we don't understand the mistakes of the past. We have people out there, who really think that you're a racist if you're not a fan of a black singer, or if a white person wins a competition that was clearly a better candidate or whatever for winning the competition, then the judges are racist. It's the subjective word that gets thrown around too easy these days, and I think we should actually look up what the definition of a racist is. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people call other people Nazis, in one day. And this is how fucked up our culture is right now. Okay. In one day, I was called a fascist, a communist, a Nazi, and a Jew. Okay. And also a statist, a state-loving individual. And, it's crazy, where we are. We're so quick to put labels on people, and instead of just labeling it what it is. I'll go ahead and pass we got 2 minutes left, so go ahead and let you wrap it up and final words.
Before I get into a closing statement, thank you for the debate and bearing with me and my kids and stuff. And I hope I see more of you on QallOut. I enjoyed this. It was spirited. I thought we had really great clash. And it was fun. I really enjoyed it. I'd actually love to debate you on the merits of anarchism. I think that would be pretty good. But shelving that for a second, we have to ask ourselves, what are the principles that we as a country, as a city, as a state, what do we stand for? And when we look to those principles, those will guide us for that which we wish to glorify. There are many, many wonderful things that came out of the South. To me, the secession of the Southern states for the expressed stated purpose of maintaining the institution of slavery is at the absolute bottom of the ladder, right? It's probably one of the worst things that happened. Slavery as an institution is, I hate to throw out the word objectively immoral because I'm not sure if I can defend that, but if there was something that was objectively immoral, to me, slavery is about as close to that as you can get. Now, you talked about how Native Americans had slaves, how Jewish people had slaves. Well, if there was, or how Africans were enslaving each other, if there was a statue of Kunta Kinte, the slave master, that was on my town square, I would want it removed. I don't want people that thought that owning another individual, another person, was okay, and that they could be bought and sold as property was okay. I do not want them glorified. I do not want them placed upon a pedestal. I would like humanists, right? People that have won a great victory for humanity, scientists, great philosophers. These are the sort of people that we need to be glorifying, not people that
There are two just wars in the history of the United States: the Revolutionary War and the Civil War on behalf of the South, because the North was impeding on the
Just
South's
war
rights.
theories is actually my
Future debate.